Welcome to the Tax Talk with GCC FinTax. Today we have Sunita Juma with us. Sunita is the Global Head of Tax at Aramex Dubai. She has done her BSc Honours in Maths and Science from King's College London. Sunita has done executive leadership courses from IMD Business School and London Business School. She's a qualified accountant and a chartered tax advisor. Sunita, welcome to the show. Good morning, Sunita. Welcome to the show.
Good morning, Anu. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
It's a pleasure to have you here, Sunita. Sunita, why don't we start this discussion with your professional journey? As in, when did you enter the field of taxation, and for how long you have been in Middle East?
Yeah, sure. So after graduating in London, I started my professional career as a trainee chartered accountant. And following that, I took up an in-house tax role with an oil and gas multinational. The reason I wanted to move to tax is because it involved not only the financial and accounting aspects, but also the legal and the tax jurisdictions in various countries, which brings with it its own complexity and challenges. So I was interested in tax as a result. And from the oil and gas company, I then moved to the banking and financial services sector, decided to take up study and attain a qualification as a chartered tax advisor, and then moved as a tax manager for a manufacturing company and rose to become head of tax. Then came the move to GCC. For family reasons, we moved to GCC, and that has been a very interesting move for me. I have worked with a lot of talented people in London, but the move to GCC has been really interesting. First, I worked for a big four company, and then I moved on as head of tax for Aramex. Aramex being a multinational listed company in UAE with operations in over 65 countries, brought with it its own challenges. So I set up the tax function, I built the tax team, and as Aramex grew, we grew in tax. And it's been very, very interesting to get to know the various tax jurisdictions and be involved from VAT, corporate tax, transfer pricing, to all the tax affairs of a company as big as Aramex. So that's basically my career. It's over, I think my career in tax spans over 20 years.
So moving on to taxes, Sunita, VAT was introduced here in 2018, and it's almost 2.5 years now. So how has this introduction of VAT impacted the logistics sector, and what challenges did you face in managing tax compliances in Aramex?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. The logistics sector has its own challenges and complexity because you have to deal with import of goods and the import VAT, the customs duty, and import VAT applies on the customs duty as well. Excise tax, the VAT being a new law is always difficult in terms of interpretation. So logistics sector has its own nuances in terms of how the VAT applies to different transactions. But going back, the law, we didn't actually receive the published law and regulations until as late as November 2017. And the law was to be effectively applied from 1st of January 2018. And that was in KSA and UAE. So we had a huge challenge in terms of understanding the law, getting the IT systems to be ready in time for implementation, understand and make sure that we had the right invoice layouts, we had the right training provided to the business departments, because it affects, VAT is a transactional tax, and therefore it affects almost all areas of a business in terms of HR, in terms of treasury, sales, procurement, and the like. So it was quite a challenge. Apart from making sure that we tested our systems to be ready in time for January implementation.
So, in your opinion, Smita, how do you see taxes shape up in the UAE? In the absence of enough clarity, do you think taxpayers will have to undergo a lot of litigation before law gets settled here?
Yes, I mean, in any country, when a law is introduced, it will go through an evolutionary process. And case law is very important because without case law, you will not evolve and mature as tax legislation. There is a lot of guidance that has been published by the FTA, which is industry specific. And the FTA are also very forthcoming with providing clarifications where businesses seek clarity in certain areas of interpretation. But saying that, there will always be challenges and disputes because of interpretation of the law and the nuances of the businesses and how how the transactions are. So with case law, I think it will mature, and it's natural for any country and any new law to mature and develop.
But case laws, Sunita, are not very easily available, right? So, how was your experience of dealing with the tax authorities with FTA here? How was your experience?
Yeah, so that's true. Case law takes a few years, but there have been a few cases that have been heard actually in the UAE. So it's not where I thought it might take years and years for a decision to be made and for the court process to develop. I think the government and the legislation, the court system is acting faster than I thought they would. So there have already been a few cases that have been heard. So that's been good to know. In terms of the FTA, they have been very proactive in auditing various industry groups. That provides some level of comfort. It's burdensome for any business to have to go through an audit, but I think it's good because it gives you clarity, it gives you comfort in terms of the positions you've taken, and if there are any areas which need to be fixed, then you fix it quickly instead of building penalties and interest for a later date if there's an audit. So the earlier the better, I think. So FTA have been quite approachable to an extent. I mean, it's a new institution. It's only 3 years old, and yet they have been, they've been quite proactive, I think, and trying to understand businesses. So I think it's good.
Right.
Compared to other tax jurisdictions, because I've had the experience of various other tax jurisdictions, and I think compared to that, the FTA have been trying very hard to understand businesses.
Right. So talking about this thing, Smita, what are some of the policy and tax related reforms you would like to see happen in Middle East in light of current situation, current tough economic situations? Is there anything specific you would ask from the government?
Right. Are you talking about COVID-19 in terms of the
Yeah,
pressure?
COVID-19 is a tough situation for everyone.
Yeah, yeah. I think with COVID-19, I would say that it has been a shock to all economies globally, and UAE is no different. KSA, as you know, they did provide some incentives and reliefs from tax perspective, but they allowed businesses to delay tax payments for 3 months, 3 months for withholding tax, corporate tax, and VAT, and also provided amnesty in case of any infringements of the law and you wanted to file your tax returns and you found that you needed to disclose any tax irregularities. But in UAE, the relief that was offered by the FTA was only for 1 month, which was still welcome. And any incentive is welcome for business. And there's been an immense amount of shortage of liquidity and cash pressure on business. So I would say that any more incentives that the government can provide, the FTA can provide, would be very much welcome in order to fuel the economy and keep businesses in survival mode in the short term, and also for sustainability in the long term. So I think that if they provide more incentives, that will be very much welcome by the industry. In terms of the development of taxes, the UAE has signed several double tax treaties with so many jurisdictions now. We are one of the good jurisdictions in terms of the treaty network that we have. The Ministry of Finance has now also introduced economic substance regulations, CBCR, and so I don't know how it's going to develop, but it's possible that in the future there might be corporate tax that's been talked about and being discussed. I think there's been a lot of news in the press about it. I'm not sure what what the crystal ball holds, but it's likely that in the future the government might gravitate towards bringing in corporate tax, in which case we probably not need ESR.
Right. So, in fact, moving on to ASR, Economic Substance Regulations, it has already been introduced. We are moving towards filing the ESR reports now
Yeah.
in December. So, what would be the key points, Sunita, which you think companies should keep in mind to prepare themselves for this assessment? And what guidance do you expect from the government so that this process of filing can be more efficient?
Yeah, so ESR notifications, a lot of companies, the deadline was 30th of June for most of the licensing bodies. And a lot of companies had a mad rush, went through a mad rush to file the notifications because of COVID. Companies were expecting an extension for the filing deadline for notifications. And sometimes there wasn't enough clarity for some businesses whether they had to file notifications because of the year end that they were in. For example, September year end, so they weren't sure. So there was a bit of a mad rush, but I think we're over that now, and we have to file the report by December. Most businesses will have to file the ESR report by December 2020. We're waiting for the guidelines on that in terms of the documentation that will be required to be submitted, the questions that need to be answered to provide enough adequacy and substance to satisfy the economic substance for a company's existence in this country. I'm hoping that whilst we can answer all the questions to provide sufficient clarity and adequacy, that the guidelines don't require us to file any sensitive documentation, and it's available on request, but not required to be filed. And also I'm hoping that the guidelines provide sufficient clarity in terms of the substance that is required to satisfy, the economic substance regulations. So we await for the rules and hope that, they're published soon.
Right. Sunita, my next question to you is, being a woman, how easy or how difficult it is for you to navigate in this world of taxes, which is generally, dominated by men all over the world?
Maybe. What I would say is a changing dynamic. When I started out in tax, there weren't as many women that I came across in the tax field. But, increasingly, I'm seeing more and more women in the tax profession. And I would say that there are at least around 40% of the professionals in the tax field are women. So it's been quite a good, improvement in terms of for women in tax. For anyone to keep their interest and career going, you have to focus on your technical skills as well as your interpersonal skills. So I would say that try and get closer to the business, make sure you're always adding value, and keep forging ahead. I don't think anyone or anything can hold you back, provided you have the technical skills as well as all the communication skills that are required to perform your role.
Sunita, it was very interesting talking to you. Thank you for your insights. And it was a pleasure to have you here with us today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. And it's been a pleasure to talk to you as well. Thank you.